As I adjusted my captain's hat in the mirror of the airport restroom, I could not help but notice the lines etched deep into my face. 40 years of flying had left their mark, not just on my appearance, but on my soul. I, Hugo Almeida, was about to embark on my final flight as a commercial airline pilot. The weight of this moment was not lost on me. For 4 decades, the sky had been my home, the cockpit, my sanctuary. I had navigated through storms, both literal and metaphorical, guiding countless passengers safely to their destinations. But today's flight would be different. Today, I was the one heading towards an unknown destination: retirement. As I made my way through the bustling airport, memories flooded my mind. I remembered my first solo flight, the exhilaration and terror mingling in my chest as I took off alone for the first time. I thought of the many sunrises I had witnessed from 35,000 feet, each one a reminder of the beauty and vastness of the world. But not all memories were pleasant. There were the close calls, the near misses that had left my hands shaking long after we had safely landed. And then there were the personal sacrifices, the birthdays missed, the anniversaries forgotten, the gradual disintegration of my marriage to Beatrice. I pushed those thoughts aside as I approached the gate. My co-pilot, Lucas, was already there, going through the pre-flight checklist. He greeted me with a nod and a smile, his youth and enthusiasm a stark contrast to my weathered experience. "Ready for your last rodeo, Captain?" Lucas asked, his voice tinged with both respect and a hint of sadness. I nodded, not trusting my voice at that moment. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. This was it. The last time I would go through this familiar routine. The last time I would feel the surge of the engines as we took off. The last time I would guide a massive machine through the skies. As we boarded the plane and began our final preparations, I found myself taking extra time with each check, savoring every moment. I ran my hands over the controls, feeling the cool metal beneath my fingers, committing every detail to memory. The passengers began to board, a mix of business people, families, and solo travelers, each one with their own story, their own reason for flying today. Little did they know that they were part of a significant chapter in my life story. As the last passenger settled in and the cabin crew completed their checks, I took a deep breath. I had done this thousands of times before, but never with the knowledge that it would be the last. I picked up the microphone, ready to make my usual pre-flight announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 2473 to Rio de Janeiro. We are expecting a smooth flight today with clear skies ahead." I paused for a moment, tempted to say more, to share the significance of this flight with the passengers, but I held back. This was my journey, my ending. They had their own stories, their own beginnings and endings to worry about. As we taxied towards the runway, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. Pride for a career well served, sadness for a chapter closing, and a tinge of fear for the unknown that lay ahead. But as the engines roared to life and we began our ascent, all those emotions faded away, replaced by the familiar, comforting focus that came with guiding this metal bird into the sky. Little did I know that this flight, my last hurrah, would bring more than just an end to my career. It would bring a confrontation with a past I had long tried to forget, and a chance at redemption I never thought I would have. As the pre-flight checks continued, Lucas handed me the passenger manifest. It was a routine I had performed countless times, a quick glance to familiarize myself with the souls I would be responsible for during our journey. My eyes scanned the list mechanically until they froze on a name that sent a jolt through my system. Paula Santos. My heart began to race, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. It could not be her, I told myself. It had to be a coincidence, a cruel trick of fate on my last flight. But the birth date listed next to her name confirmed my worst fears. This was my Paula, my daughter, the child I had walked away from 30 years ago. Memories I had long suppressed came flooding back, as vivid and painful as if they had happened yesterday. I saw Beatrice, my ex-wife, her face streaked with tears as she pleaded with me to stay. I heard the sound of little Paula's laughter, unaware that her father was about to disappear from her life. The weight of my decision, the selfishness of my actions, crashed down upon me with renewed force. I had told myself that leaving was for the best, that I was not cut out for fatherhood, that my career demanded sacrifices. But in that moment, staring at Paula's name on the manifest, those excuses rang hollow. I had missed her entire life, her first day of school, her graduations, her triumphs and heartbreaks. And now, by some twist of fate, she would be on my last flight. Lucas must have noticed my distress. He asked if everything was all right, concern evident in his voice. I brushed off his worry, claiming it was just the emotions of my final flight getting to me. But inside, I was in turmoil. How would I face her? What would I say? Did she even know I was the pilot? As I struggled to regain my composure, I realized I had a decision to make. I could try to avoid her, to complete this flight as if she were just another passenger. It would be easier that way, to not confront the pain and regret of the past. But a small voice inside me whispered that this might be my last chance, my final opportunity to make amends for a lifetime of absence. The rational part of my brain argued against it. What right did I have to disrupt her life now? She had grown up without me, had built a life of her own. My sudden reappearance could only bring pain and confusion. And yet, the thought of letting her walk off this plane without at least trying to speak to her felt like another act of cowardice. As the time for takeoff approached, I found myself torn between duty and desire. My professional instincts told me to focus on the flight, to push aside these personal distractions for the safety of all passengers. But the father in me, long dormant but suddenly awakened, yearned for a chance at redemption. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Whatever decision I made, I knew this flight would be unlike any other in my long career. The skies ahead were clear, according to the weather report, but I sensed turbulence of a different kind awaiting me. As I prepared to leave the cockpit for the final pre-flight checks, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the windshield. The man staring back at me looked older, more vulnerable than the confident captain I had always presented to the world. In that moment, I realized that this flight would not just be the end of my career, but potentially the beginning of something I had thought lost forever. With a mix of trepidation and a strange sense of hope, I stepped out of the cockpit. Whatever happened in the next few hours, I knew that my life, like this flight, was headed into uncharted territory. The familiar vibration of the engines coming to life beneath my feet did little to calm my nerves as I settled into the captain's seat. My hands moved automatically through the pre-flight sequence, muscle memory taking over where my distracted mind faltered. Lucas's voice sounded distant as he ran through the checklist. each item ticking off another step closer to the moment I both longed for and dreaded. As we taxied towards the runway, my eyes kept darting to the cabin door, half expecting Paula to burst in at any moment, demanding answers I was not sure I could give. But the door remained closed, and the only voice in my headset was that of the control tower, clearing us for takeoff. The thrust of the engines pushed me back into my seat as we accelerated down the runway. In that moment, as the wheels left the ground and we began our ascent, I felt a familiar surge of exhilaration. For a brief, beautiful instant, all my worries were left behind on the tarmac. Up here, in the realm of clouds and endless sky, I was in control. But reality intruded as we leveled off at cruising altitude. Somewhere behind me, separated by a thin metal door and 30 years of absence, sat my daughter. I wondered what she looked like now. Would I recognize her if I saw her? Did she have Beatrice's eyes or my stubborn chin? These questions, long buried under layers of guilt and rationalization, now demanded answers. Lucas' voice cut through my reverie, reminding me that it was time for the in-flight announcement. I picked up the microphone, my hand trembling slightly. As I began to speak, I found myself listening to my own voice as if it belonged to a stranger, wondering if Paula would recognize it, if she would make the connection. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather conditions are favorable, and we expect a smooth flight to Rio de Janeiro. Our estimated arrival time is... I continued with the standard announcement, but my mind was elsewhere. Each word felt like a missed opportunity, a chance to say something meaningful slipping away. As I finished and replaced the microphone, I caught Lucas giving me a concerned look. I had flown with him long enough for him to know when something was off. The next few hours stretched out before me like an eternity. Every chime of the call button made me tense, wondering if it was Paula, if she had figured out who I was. I found myself inventing reasons to leave the cockpit, to walk down the aisle, hoping for a glimpse of her. But each time, my courage failed me at the last moment, and I retreated back to the safety of the flight deck. As we crossed the equator, I realized that half of our flight was already over. Time, which had seemed to crawl at first, was now slipping away too quickly. The chance I had been given, this cosmic coincidence that had placed Paula on my final flight, was rapidly coming to an end. I knew I had to make a decision. To continue hiding behind my captain's uniform, to let this opportunity pass by, would be to abandon Paula all over again. But to confront her, to open up old wounds and risk disrupting her life, felt equally daunting. As the coast of Brazil appeared on the horizon, a faint line separating the endless blue of the ocean from the sky, I made my choice. For better or worse, I would not let this flight end without speaking to Paula. I owed her that much at least. With a deep breath, I turned to Lucas. "I need you to take over for a few minutes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's something I have to do." As I stood up, my legs felt unsteady, as if I were a novice pilot experiencing turbulence for the first time. But as I reached for the cockpit door, I knew there was no turning back. Whatever awaited me on the other side, it was time to face the consequences of choices made long ago. As I stepped out of the cockpit, the hushed atmosphere of the cabin enveloped me. The soft hum of the engines and the occasional murmur of conversation created a cocoon of normalcy that felt at odds with the turmoil inside me. I made my way down the aisle, my eyes scanning each row, searching for a face I had not seen in 3 decades. Halfway down the plane, I saw her, Paula, my daughter. She sat by the window, her head bent over a book, oblivious to my presence. The resemblance to Beatrice was striking. The same dark wavy hair, the same determined set of her jaw. But as she looked up, startled by my prolonged presence, I saw my own eyes staring back at me. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Paula looked at me with mild curiosity, then growing confusion as she took in my frozen stance and the emotion I could not hide from my face. Before I could gather my thoughts, a sudden bout of turbulence shook the plane. Instinct took over, and I grabbed the nearest seat to steady myself. The moment broken, I mumbled an apology and retreated hastily to the cockpit, my heart pounding. Back in my seat, I gripped the controls, grateful for something tangible to hold on to as my world tilted on its axis. Lucas shot me a questioning look, but I shook my head, not ready to explain. As we navigated through the patch of rough air, my mind replayed the brief encounter over and over. Had she recognized me? Had there been a flicker of something? Recognition? Anger? Curiosity in her eyes? Or was I just a stranger to her, an oddly behaving pilot on an otherwise unremarkable flight? The turbulence outside the plane was nothing compared to the emotional storm brewing inside me. Memories I had long suppressed came crashing back. I remembered the day I had left, the weight of my packed bags, the sound of the door closing behind me. I had told myself it was for the best, that Beatrice and Paula would be better off without me. But seeing Paula now, a grown woman with a life I knew nothing about, the hollowness of those excuses rang in my ears. As the turbulence subsided and we returned to smooth air, I found myself wondering about the life Paula had lived. Had she wondered about me? Had Beatrice told her why I left? Did she carry the weight of abandonment as I carried the weight of guilt? The rest of the flight passed in a blur. I went through the motions, performing my duties with the precision honed by years of experience, but my mind was elsewhere. With each passing minute, we drew closer to Rio, closer to the moment when Paula would walk off this plane and out of my life again, unless I found the courage to speak to her. As we began our descent, I made a decision. I could not let this opportunity pass. Whatever the outcome, I owed it to Paula, and to myself, to at least try to bridge the chasm of years between us. With trembling hands, I picked up the microphone for the final announcement. As I spoke the familiar words about landing procedures and local time, I added something I had never said in all my years of flying. And passengers, this is a special flight for me. It's my last as a captain before retirement. I would like to thank you all for being part of this journey. As I replaced the microphone, I caught Lucas looking at me with surprise. I had never been one for personal announcements, but as we descended through the clouds towards the glittering lights of Rio, I hoped that my words had reached the one passenger they were truly meant for. The wheels touched down on the runway, marking the end of my career. But perhaps, I dared to hope, the beginning of something else. As the plane taxied to the gate, I steeled myself for what would come next. The real turbulence, I knew, still lay ahead. As the seatbelt sign illuminated and the plane began its final descent, I heard a commotion from the cabin. My heart raced as I realized what it might mean. Seconds later, Lucas confirmed my fears. "Captain, there's a passenger insisting on speaking with you. Says it's urgent." I had known this moment might come, but I was not prepared for the rush of emotions that flooded through me. With shaking hands, I instructed Lucas to take over the landing procedures. I stood up, straightening my uniform, and took a deep breath before opening the cockpit door. There she stood, Paula, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and something I could not quite identify. Anger, curiosity, fear. The resemblance to her mother was even more striking up close, and for a moment I found myself transported back in time, facing Beatrice on the day I had walked away. I gestured for Paula to enter the cockpit, acutely aware of the other passengers' curious stares. As she stepped inside, the air seemed to crackle with tension. I closed the door behind us, sealing us in this small space where 30 years of absence hung heavy between us. Paula spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. Her words came out in a rush, confirming that she had recognized my voice during the announcement. She demanded answers, her tone a mixture of accusation and desperation. I had imagined this scenario countless times over the years, rehearsed what I might say if I ever saw her again. But now, faced with the reality of her presence, those carefully prepared words deserted me. I found myself stumbling through an explanation, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. As I spoke, I watched Paula's expression shift. The initial shock gave way to a myriad of emotions: hurt, anger, confusion. She interrupted me several times, her questions sharp and probing. Why had I left? Why had I never reached out? Did I ever think about her? Each query was a dagger, reminding me of the depth of my failure as a father. I tried to explain my reasons, knowing how hollow they would sound. I spoke of my fear of fatherhood, my belief that they would be better off without me, my cowardice in never reaching out as the years passed. Paula listened, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. When I finished, a heavy silence fell over the cockpit. Outside, the lights of Rio grew closer, a reminder that our time was running out. Finally, Paula spoke again. Her voice was quieter now, laden with a lifetime of unspoken words. She told me of the birthdays spent wondering if I would appear, of the father-daughter dances she had attended alone, of the milestones in her life, tinged with the absence of a parent. As she spoke, I felt the full weight of my choices bearing down on me. The hurt I had caused, the memories I had missed, the relationship I had thrown away. It all crashed over me like a wave, threatening to pull me under. The plane jolted as the wheels touched down, startling us both. Our time had run out. Paula looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She asked if I had any regrets. I opened my mouth to respond, but at that moment, Lucas' voice crackled over the intercom, reminding me of my duties as captain. The spell was broken. Paula stepped back, her expression closing off. As she turned to leave the cockpit, I was struck by the realization that this might be the last time I ever saw her. I called out, my voice hoarse with emotion. I told her that my biggest regret was not being there to see her grow into the strong woman standing before me. Paula paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, I thought she might turn back, but then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of disembarking passengers. I slumped into my seat, emotionally drained. As the plane taxied to the gate, I wondered if I had just experienced the most important moment of my life, or if I had lost my daughter all over again. The cockpit door closed behind Paula, her presence lingering heavily in the air. As I settled back into my seat, Lucas' voice cut through my tumultuous thoughts, reminding me of our post-landing duties. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Lucas's concerned gaze told me he knew something significant had transpired, but he did not pry. We focused on the familiar routine, a welcome distraction from the emotional maelstrom within me. As we guided the aircraft to the gate, Paula's words replayed in my mind. The hurt in her voice when she spoke of missed birthdays and milestones haunted me. I had convinced myself that my absence was for the best, but hearing the impact from her own lips shattered that illusion completely. Once we had parked and the passengers began to disembark, Lucas turned to me, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. I took a deep breath, deciding that after all these years, I owed someone the truth. I told Lucas about Paula, about my decision to leave all those years ago. As I spoke, I realized it was the first time I had ever voiced these thoughts aloud. Lucas listened without judgment, his presence a steady anchor as I navigated the choppy waters of my past. When I finished, he remained silent for a moment before offering a gentle observation about second chances in life. His words struck a chord within me. I had been given a chance I never thought I would have, and I had let it slip through my fingers. The realization spurred me into action. I stood up abruptly, startling Lucas. Without a word, I rushed out of the cockpit and into the now empty cabin. My eyes scanned the deplaning area, searching desperately for a glimpse of Paula. I spotted her about to step off the plane and called out her name, my voice carrying over the murmur of departing passengers. Paula turned, surprise evident on her face. As I approached her, I saw a myriad of emotions flash across her features. Confusion, anger, and something that looked almost like hope. I stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure of what to say. Paula broke the silence, her voice low and tinged with a mixture of exhaustion and residual anger. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her gaze. I told her that I had not said nearly enough, that there were no words to adequately express my regret, my shame, my desire to make amends if she would allow it. As I spoke, I saw Paula's expression soften, almost imperceptibly. She did not interrupt me this time, letting me stumble through my apology and my request for a chance to explain further, away from the confines of the airplane. When I finished, Paula was quiet for a long moment. The last of the passengers filed past us, leaving us alone in the bridge between the plane and the terminal. A fitting metaphor, I thought, for the bridge I was desperately trying to build between us. Finally, Paula spoke. Her voice was measured, guarded. She could not promise anything, but she agreed to listen. We arranged to meet at the airport cafe in an hour. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, a mixture of hope and trepidation swirling in my chest. As I watched her disappear into the terminal, I realized that my journey was far from over. In fact, the most important part might just be beginning. As I made my way through the bustling terminal, my mind raced with thoughts of the impending meeting with Paula. However, fate had other plans. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, and when I answered, I heard the panicked voice of the ground crew supervisor. A severe thunderstorm was rapidly approaching, threatening to shut down the airport. All incoming flights were being diverted, but there was one aircraft still en route that would not have enough fuel to reach an alternate destination. It needed to land here, and quickly. My retirement would have to wait. I had been called back for one last crucial flight. I rushed back to the gate, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and regret. I had to cancel my meeting with Paula, sending a hurried text explaining the situation. Her reply was curt, leaving me uncertain if I had squandered my last chance at reconciliation. As I re-entered the cockpit, I found Lucas already there, having been briefed on the situation. His face was grim as he relayed the details. The incoming flight, carrying over 200 passengers, was running dangerously low on fuel. We would need to guide them in through the storm, using our more advanced equipment to assist their approach. We took off into angry skies, the turbulence immediately buffeting our small aircraft. Rain lashed against the windshield as we climbed, obscuring our view. But I had not spent 4 decades in the air to be daunted now. I focused on the instruments, blocking out everything else. As we reached cruising altitude, we established radio contact with the distressed flight. The captain's voice was strained but professional as he reported their fuel status and position. We began to guide them towards the airport, acting as a beacon in the tempest. The next hour was a blur of constant communication, rapid calculations, and split-second decisions. We weaved through the storm, always staying just ahead of the other aircraft, leading them through the safest path we could find. As we began our descent, the situation grew even more precarious. Wind shear alerts blared in our cockpit, and I could only imagine the chaos in the larger plane behind us. But there was no turning back now. They were committed to this approach, their fuel reserves all but depleted. In those final minutes of descent, everything I had ever learned about flying came into play. I guided our plane down through howling winds and sheets of rain, knowing that the other aircraft was following our every move. The runway appeared through the gloom, a strip of light in the darkness. We touched down hard, the impact jarring my teeth. But we were down safely. Behind us, I heard the radio crackle as the other plane reported their own successful landing. A collective sigh of relief filled our cockpit. As we taxied off the runway, making room for the larger aircraft, I felt a profound sense of closure. This, I realized, had been my true final flight. Not a routine trip marked by personal drama, but a mission where every skill I had honed over my career was put to the test. We parked at the gate, and as I began the shutdown procedure, I noticed a crowd gathering outside. The passengers from the distressed flight were disembarking, many of them looking towards our smaller plane with expressions of gratitude. Among the crowd, I spotted a familiar face. Paula stood there, her eyes wide with a mix of emotions I could not fully decipher. She had witnessed the entire ordeal, I realized. She had seen not the man who had abandoned her, but the pilot I had become. As I stepped out of the cockpit for the last time, I knew that whatever came next between Paula and me, it would begin from this moment. Not with explanations or apologies, but with a shared experience of the person I was now. Whether that would be enough, only time would tell. The aftermath of the emergency landing was a whirlwind of debriefings, paperwork, and congratulatory handshakes. Through it all, I found my eyes constantly scanning the crowd, searching for Paula. But she had vanished, leaving me to wonder if our brief moment of connection amid the chaos had been nothing more than a product of my desperate imagination. As the adrenaline of the event began to fade, the weight of my impending retirement settled back onto my shoulders. I had always imagined this day would be filled with a sense of accomplishment, perhaps even relief. Instead, I felt adrift, untethered from the career that had defined me for so long. Lucas approached me as I stood staring out at the now calm tarmac. He had already changed out of his uniform, a stark reminder that our paths were diverging. He extended his hand, and as I shook it, I saw a mix of respect and something akin to pity in his eyes. He wished me well, promising to stay in touch, but we both knew the realities of life would likely prevent that. As I finally left the airport, stepping into the humid Rio night, I found myself at a loss. For the first time in decades, I had no flight to prepare for, no schedule to adhere to. The freedom I had once craved now felt oppressive in its vastness. I hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of my hotel without much thought. As we wound through the city streets, the vibrant nightlife of Rio, a stark contrast to my somber mood, I found my mind drifting back to Paula. I wondered what she had thought, seeing me in action one last time. Had it changed her perception of me? Or had it only served to highlight the decades of absence, the countless moments I had missed? The hotel lobby was quiet when I arrived, the late hour having driven most guests to their rooms. As I approached the front desk to check in, the concierge handed me an envelope along with my room key. My heart raced as I recognized Paula's handwriting on the front. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the unopened envelope heavy in my hands. I had imagined so many scenarios for how this day might end, but none of them had prepared me for this moment. With trembling fingers, I opened the letter and began to read. Paula's words were measured, neither warm nor cold. She acknowledged the skill and bravery I had displayed during the emergency landing, admitting it had given her a perspective on my life she had never considered before. But she also made it clear that one moment of heroism could not erase a lifetime of absence. She wrote of her struggles growing up without a father, of the void my departure had left in her life. But she also spoke of the strength she had found, the person she had become in spite of, or perhaps because of, my absence. She did not offer forgiveness, but neither did she close the door entirely. The letter ended with a phone number and a single line. If you are ready to do the work, I am willing to listen. As I set the letter down, I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me. There was hope, yes, but also a deep sense of the challenge that lay ahead. I realized that retiring from my career as a pilot was just the beginning. The real work, the most important journey of my life, was only now about to start. I looked out the window at the Rio skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars. For so long, the sky had been my home, the cockpit, my sanctuary. Now, I faced a new horizon, one far more daunting than any storm I had ever flown through. As I picked up my phone, Paula's number displayed on the screen. I knew that whatever came next would require more courage, skill, and dedication than any flight I had ever undertaken. With a deep breath, I pressed the call button, ready to begin the longest and most important journey of my life.
Hey there, Unraveling Ties family. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I hope it touched your heart, made you think, or even inspired you in some way. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Don't be shy. Leave a comment below and share your perspective with our community. Your voice matters to us. If you enjoyed today's story and want to be a part of our journey as we unravel the complexities of human relationships, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a new story. We're always eager to explore new angles and dive into the themes that resonate with you the most. So tell us, what kind of stories would you like to see in upcoming episodes? Your input helps us create content that you'll love. And hey, if today's story reminded you of a personal experience or a tale you'd like to share, we're all ears. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments. Who knows, your story might even inspire a future Unraveling Ties episode. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Unraveling Ties family. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Until next time, keep embracing the ties that bind us and never stop exploring the depths of the human heart. See you in the next video.